I'm with Aatish Taseer, the well-known Indian journalist, British journalist, American journalist. I don't know exactly how to describe you, Aatish, because you are everything and you have so many identities, so many lives, but I'm going to say half Indian at least. So a half Indian journalist and a half something else. And Aatish is in New York and I'm in Chandigarh. I'm Jyoti Malhotra with the Tribune. Aatish is a very well-known author, writer, has written several books on India, amongst them, and one of my favorites, Twice Born, Life and Death on the Ganges. Also, A Stranger to History, which is one of his earlier books, and he talks about sort of traveling across um, parts of the Indian subcontinent in Lahore, where his father lived and died. Atish's mother lives in Delhi. He grew up in Delhi, in India, but his latest book is called A Return to Self, and I'm going to show this to you, dear viewer. It's called A Return to Self, Excursions in Exile by Aatish Taseer. Aatish, welcome to the Tribune.
Thank you. And now we can just clear this up once and for all. Since you're the editor of the Tribune, we can also say the one thing I absolutely am, almost 75% is Punjabi.
Oh,
Not 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 just one side of the Punjab, but both sides. So.
absolutely. And we are in, at least one side of the Punjab. And you're absolutely right. You do belong to both sides of the Punjab. And,
Yeah.
the rivers that divide us and join us, as we've seen in the floods recently with the waters of the Ravi, flowing from India into Pakistan.
Yeah.
That's another story. But Atish, you're
Salim Punjab Zindabad.
Bilkul, absolutely. So, Atish, this book of yours, in many senses, at least to me, and you talk about returning to yourself within quotes and returning home. But I do want to, to me, it was very interesting to read, and I'd like to read out, in this interview, this paragraph, which actually moved me quite a bit. And you say, to lose one's country is to know an intimate shame, like being disowned by a parent, turned out of one's home. Your country is so bound up with your sense of self that you don't realize what a ballast it has been until it's gone. So tell me about this paragraph.
Um, I mean, I suppose there's this almost like an a priori, like avant la lettre idea of being from a place. And it's like this kind of unwritten constitution. You don't need to state it. The minute you state it, it's like saying why you're somebody's son or why you're somebody's child. You just are that thing. And I think my experience of India was very much like that. It was so instinctive. It was so the background of my life. It was informed by love, by intimacy, by friendship, by having grown up, like the festivals, running around the streets of Delhi, like all of these things that are so you can't actually recreate that with another country. You can take the citizenship of any country you want, but that kind of what Kundera calls the understructure of your creativity, which is was so deeply Indian for me. And suddenly I found myself in a position where I was having to make a case for why this inheritance or why this thing that was just innate was something I had to explain, I had to justify. And in that there was
Justify why you were Indian or why you were writing about India. What was it that you were
yeah,
just?
why I was so inextricably tied up with India. And for me it felt like a terrible betrayal of especially of my grandmother, who was of a conservative Punjabi background. She was confronted by something pretty unusual. My mother had come back pregnant from a Pakistani man who she'd had a love affair with. It was all like a lot of scandal, and these were conservative people, and their response to it was just total affection, acceptance, love. And suddenly, like, the element of shame came in when I felt like I had to justify that deepest level of belonging. I had to make a case for it. I had to tell the government why I was the thing I was.
So just to, I hope I'm not interrupting your chain of thought, but just to say that the reason we're talking about Atish's being Indian is because in 2019, just before COVID, um, the government of India cancelled his OCI card. And Aatish Taseer, of course, had grown up in India, like he says, although he had a Pakistani father. His mother is Indian and remains fully Indian. So when his card was cancelled by the Modi government, he was no longer allowed to come home. So have you been home since, Aatish?
No, I'm not. I'm not even allowed a simple tourist visa. So I'm absolutely. I haven't set foot in India for 6 years. In fact, I'm going on an assignment to Nepal in October, and one of the flights was going through Delhi, and I almost had to think like how surreal it would be to be in Delhi airport, unable to go out because I actually like I'm not even permitted a simple tourist visa.
So, in a sense, the cancellation of your OCI card or of your, or the fact that you're banned from India spurred you to write this book.
Absolutely, absolutely. In some ways, so we should say like the OCI was not canceled like out of the blue. It was like an act of recrimination. I'd written against the prime minister on the cover of Time magazine, and that incident uh, created this kind of volcanic reaction with Modi and his followers. But then it was followed by a threat in August to take the card away. And I think that the place that you used to work at, the Print, broke the story, and the government's official jumped on Twitter and canceled the card, like with this kind of Trumpian maliciousness, brutality, and so it was done very much as a kind of there was an active element of malice involved, and once it happened, it was this. I felt this like, on one hand, this sense of loss, but on the other, a feeling that I could start to go out into the world again and almost apply my concerns, my Indian concerns, to other societies and find a way forward as a writer. That
Mhm.
was very important to me. I didn't want them to put me out of business as a writer. That was a great fear of mine.
So while Prime Minister Modi and the government cancelled your OCI card, banned you from the country, it also allowed you to acknowledge what you are and to belong firmly or to one country, which is the US or Britain.
I don't think I think of it like that anymore. I was talking to a Caribbean artist yesterday, and she was explaining her feelings of precarity. She was part of the Windrush generation, and she was talking about her precarity in Britain. And I would be a fool after what happened to me to believe that any of that is secure again, or that we've had massive demonstrations in England against anti-immigration demonstrations. There's a huge sort of groundswell of anti-immigrant sentiment moving through this country, and so it's my idea of where I belong or whatever. It's very small. It's very provincial. It's like I have an address. That's what I have. I have a bank account, I have an address, I have a dog, I have a husband, and that's it. Like I'm not going to try to succumb to the grand narrative anymore because you're really setting yourself up for disappointment.
So, in a sense, you have to be thankful to Prime Minister Modi and the government for letting you come to terms with a lot of what you've come to terms with. Yes?
No, I'm not thankful
No?
at all. No, it was a malicious, dreadful thing to do that denied me. Like I could very well have come to all of terms with anything and still had India in my life and had my grandmother in my life and my mother in my life. No, it was vengeful, it was awful, and I no, I don't thank him for anything.
Okay, so here is a sentence again um, that I liked very much, and you said the burden of trying to fit into India, of forever apologizing for its shortcomings, apologizing for my own westernization, was suddenly lifted from me, and the West was no longer some dirty secret that I could enjoy only at the detriment of the real India within quotes. It was all I had. I was home.
Yeah. I mean, we have so much of this problem in India where we have these layers of history and we have people who are the inheritors of those layers of history. You and I perhaps are to some extent the product of British rule in India. Other people might feel themselves to be the product of centuries of Muslim rule. And in this new environment, this quest for authenticity in India is exhausting. You feel like you didn't make yourself the way you are. If you're at odds with the kind of mainstream or the sort of, the sort of majoritarian sentiment, that's simply a fact of Indian history, which this government would like very much to deny. It would like sort of want to erase 1,000 years of history and to kind of scrape it away to get to a layer of purity. And it's, of course, it's a kind of wild fantasy of theirs, but it leaves a lot of people feeling uh, unaccommodated in India.
Mhm.
And somehow when I had this kind of violent undermining of my like status in India, I had a sense, well, I don't have to try anymore. I've tried for so long. I can like let my natural curiosities flow in on me. I can be, many things, and I'm not troubled by it. And so it was a little bit of a triumph of the individual over the group.
But why do you say that the West, in turn, was no longer some dirty secret that I could enjoy only at the detriment of the real India?
Because we live in such a strange relationship to the West. We live in this constant binary. It's India has so many places that it's connected to, but when you're in India, you feel this incredible, what Byron used to call a distemper of a sensitivity when it comes to Western opinion, when it comes to Western cultural power, and this need to kind of establish India in these very crude ways. And so, like, the first accusation you get when you're sort of living or working or participating in Indian life is, anything from living in a city to wearing Western clothes to speaking English, even air conditioning. It becomes like this kind of, it becomes a sort of complex of privilege that's like related to Western influence, and that people always kind of use as a sort of cudgel against you. And I mean, Amit Shah, for instance, is quite blatant about the fact that his kind of assault on English. Now, this assault on English, the English left 80 years ago. And so what's happening in India with its relationship to English is completely organic now. I
Mhm.
mean, English is part of the Indian scene
Yeah, English is an
in
Indian language. Yeah.
exactly,
Hmm.
exactly. And so that there was a sort of, yeah, there was this uh, I felt suddenly freed of that burden of the way that I had grown up, of having to apologize for the way that I had grown up.
And then you say India, even at the best of times, India asserted belonging through a pact of mutual hardship. It was the opposite of America. It offered nothing, not opportunity, not comfort, not recognition. Endurance was the mark of true belonging.
It's true though. It's here, for instance, when people talk about a place to live in, they say, well, you'll have jobs, you'll have community, you'll have a lovely stadium perhaps, or a theater. Whereas in India, there's this kind of this idea of India as the great mother, and we always have to kind of make ourselves right for her. She doesn't have to do anything, by the way, you know. And so there is this sort of like surreal atmosphere of how can I be a truer Indian? How can I be uh, how can I earn her love and respect? And and it's there's always this element of sacrifice.
Okay. And those who don't want to offer that sacrifice, what happens to them?
Why should one want to sacrifice? Do you know what I mean? Like, what about living your life and being happy and like having, what about the things that your place owes you? It's the kind of inversion of
Why did
Kennedy's
you
like,
feel this
not,
need? Why did you feel this need
not,
for a sacrifice?
oh, I think India makes you feel this need. I think when you're living and working in India, there's this constant thing like, but you have had this influence, or you've had this privilege, or you've had this thing. You're not a real Indian. Let me show you the real India. I mean, it's a constant refrain. And now it has actually a very political shape. I think this present dispensation has very much used that almost as a political strategy. They're obsessed with things like you and I know what Khan market is. It's a little colony market. It's not a big deal. But for it, they've made it a big deal. For them, it's like it's this other pole. And so these things are very much like they're just part of what India feels like when you're living there.
But why does it make you feel? Do you feel that India made you feel guilty?
I think that it made me feel a need to prove authenticity.
Prove who Aatish Taseer is.
Not so much Aatish Taseer, but like this need to kind of to sort of to assert belonging in a way that is free of the Indian accretions, whether it's I think that like whether it's Anglicization, whether it's Islam, whether it's there is this constant pressure, and one is answerable to it. It's something that's part of our politics, it's part of our cultural life, even among the left. There is this constant need, whether it's to do with dress or to do with, like, for instance, there's this rage about translations in India. And like underlying all of that is, again, that pressure of authenticity to be that somehow a real India lies beneath these layers of accretion and that you have to reach that or access that. And I think that can be exhausting, actually.
But is that true? Or is it
No,
not?
it's a fantasy. It's a fantasy, but I mean, fantasies are always. I mean, we fantasies, especially when they take political shape, are very much things that we have to reckon with. We can't ignore them because they actually have constituencies and they have people who believe in this in these ideas, and so you can't really set them aside.
And then you say, and then you go back to Turkey, or at least in the book, you go back to Turkey, where you've been, 25 years prior in 2005 when you were a younger man. Um, and then you say that, and I thought of the tendency we in countries like India and Turkey had of putting grand abstractions before concrete ideas of personal freedom and happiness. And you talk about how you had these gay sexual encounters as a young man, even though you were traveling with your girlfriend.
Yeah. Um, Turkey is a very good example, a very good counterpoint. Like if there was you have the secular Kemalist elite, you have this sense of a heartland in Anatolia, you have little things that have been I don't want to use that word weaponized, maybe militarized, but like even something like facial hair in Turkey
Mhm.
has this resonance. Erdogan will tell a Istanbul businessman, Mr. Koch, the day won't be far off where you too will have a mustache. So again, there's that assertion of the heartland against this like massive city that represents the secular Kemalist elite. So these dynamics in India, in Turkey, were very familiar to me when I was there, and sexuality is a very interesting point in this because sexuality, we hadn't brought it up earlier, but it's another way um, that you make yourself marginal. It's sort of seen in India as an extension of Western decadence, Western culture, or sometimes it's like this
What is
idea.
being gay is seen as
Exactly, it's seen as a kind of as an emanation of Western civilization. Do you know? So like in India, the and so again, like there was this feeling that gay rights, or the right to be married, the right to love somebody, who live with them, to build a life, that all of that was secondary, that it was not something that mattered, and that India was in some kind of deeper, more important convulsion. And I, to some extent, had internalized that. I felt like I was like, yeah, no, it's all like it's sort of part of the fine tuning that a society does when it's kind of fixed the big problems, and we in India can't bother with that. And so it was another aspect of myself that I kind of cast into shadow.
Mhm.
And I think that it would my moment in Istanbul, which was a confrontation with a younger self, was a realization that I would have really foregone probably the happiest years of my life by having made this concession to national identity or to the group identity. And again, like there was this sort of little victory for the individual, for individual happiness, which I think is so important. And we set that as, and it's not just the case for gay people. I think many straight people in India, for reasons of caste, class, economic stuff, like they forego happiness. And you know, if you believe as I do that we only live once, that then it really is it's a terrible sacrifice for
But
any
perhaps
country.
that's at the heart of it, is that if you believe in Hinduism, then you don't only live once, right? You live again and again and again, and therefore to give
Right.
yourself or to sacrifice yourself within quotes to the idea of India or to this larger idea is to sacrifice the individual to this idea, isn't it?
I think you're 100% right, and I think my this book, I think one of the sub sort of strands or themes is this constant this sort of this kind of quest for the individual to prevail over the group, and I think like I think that it's something that it has a lot of meaning in India, because I think that I think that the individual has taken root in an Indian context too, and is constantly embattled by various forms of group pressure.
But to come back to the idea of sexuality or of sexual freedom, of you being a gay person. Now, what you say about how Indians do not or are not accepting, even though now Section 377, which is what criminalized homosexuality, was read down only 7 or 8 years ago, 2018, I think. But having said that, this whole, the whole hypocrisy around homosexuality is more or less recent, isn't it? It's like 100 years old or 150 years old. And prior to Victorian India, if you like, I mean, all kinds of sexuality was sort of acceptable to all Indians.
Uh, I think probably you're right, but I think that we should not ignore that, like in a modern iteration, it's very different from a pre-modern reality. You know, in a modern iteration, you don't just want the freedom to have like for sexuality to be sex. It's not just that. It's personal happiness, it's marriage, it's having your inner life have a legal and public expression too, so that it's acknowledged and recognized, because that relationship between the bedroom and the public sphere, that at the heart of it is the idea of dignity, and dignity is something that you don't want to be in the shadows, you know. And I think that what we've enjoyed in the West for these, and in other societies too, but in the West particularly for the last 25, 30 years, has been incredibly meaningful on that level. I think people have like known levels of happiness and fulfillment and satisfaction that were really denied for previous generations.
So, I want to ask you about this chapter in your book, which is on perfume. And
Yeah.
it's so interesting because you talk about this vial of oud,
Ooh, yeah.
which oud, I don't even know how to pronounce it. I would rather say abad, but never mind. Um, and how then you're connecting that or the whole sort of the whole perfume. So talk to me a little bit about the perfume and then the perfume opium, about Edward Said and Orientalism.
It was kind of a discovery for me. I didn't know that there was this category in perfumes. In the actual wheel of perfumes, there's a category called the Orientals. And these include perfumes of musk, civet, heavy perfumes, you know, khas would be part of that, sandalwood to some extent. And what was very interesting for me as I started to sort of, and I remember I'd come in with nothing. I had no idea that any of this existed, was I realized that there was this incredible relationship in the West with these smells and this idea of grafting onto them a sense of otherness. So they would use, like in when the Enlightenment happened in Europe and sanitation happened and they killed the plague, there was this feeling that their modernity smelt of light, citrus-like smells, the rose, that there was this sort of, and that these other smells of the East were smells of decadence and of Eastern licentiousness. And so there was this very interesting, like an othering, but on a very visceral level of smell. And as and then obviously one was reckoning with the fact that, you know, obviously sandalwood is a sacred smell in India. You don't associate it with licentiousness at all. And so there was this, I was kind of trying to dramatize uh, a tension between how a society expresses itself against another society. It sort of transforms the other society by making it represent something that it, in fact fears itself about itself. You know, it's like, well, you're afraid of sex. Well, sex is something that happens in the East. You know, these so there was this moment of kind of like of Western self-discovery that implicated the East, that kind of dragged the East into this story. And that was part of what I was trying to get at, was that underlying tension.
So, five of the chapters of your book um, are about five countries: Uzbekistan, Morocco, Andalusia, Mexico, and Sri Lanka. So what is it that connects these? What is it? Why are you writing about these five countries?
In every society, including the last chapter, the sort of like connective tissue, or the kind of the sort of core set of like underlying feelings has to do with historical layers, like these layers of history, with syncretism, with these little moments in the past of each of these countries, whether it's Mexico, whether it's Uzbekistan to some extent, certainly in Spain, where there were these fault lines of history. And they have meaning into the past. They have a resonance and echo. And of course, coming from an Indian background where you know that our fault lines are tense and they are still part of our political life, and that need to reckon with history is something that like is a kind of, you have to do it almost in advance of dealing with the future, that the past has to be. So in every society I was kind of using that feeling that I had for Indian history, but using it in a society where the tension was not an Indian tension, but a similar tension. So that's, I think, for me, like the thread that really runs through the book is this idea of history that refuses to go quiet.
And that history you find, I mean, I haven't been to Andalusia, but certainly Uzbekistan is, it's a history whether it's coming to terms with its communist history or its pre-communist history, which is
Right.
the whole tension between Islam and communism.
Yeah, and even within that, the Persianate culture of Uzbekistan is a city culture. Then there's this idea of a Turkic nomadism. So that's another. So I think in every instance, it's these societies of two or three natures that are what kind of interest me, that keep bringing me back. So, and in Mexico, you have this tension with the pre-Columbian past and the Hispanicization of Mexico, and people feel and almost a kind of historical schizophrenia that they belong, that they're both the people who were conquered and the conqueror. And I think that those things are so much part of Indian psychology as well, that I felt that it was fascinating to explore them outside of India.
So I like that phrase, historical schizophrenia. And how do you explain that in Sri Lanka?
Um, well, in Sri Lanka, I was doing something very different, which is that I was writing about the lotus, and I was following the lotus from its organic, like literally as a physical flower, into stone, into art, into culture, into philosophy, and finally into politics, because in a kind of politicized, weaponized Buddhism, which now exists it's very similar to Hindutva. And you have the lotus both being the symbol of the Rajapaksas, but also of Mr. Modi's party. And so I guess what I was trying to use in that instance was this way that something like a flower
Mhm.
could become a sort of symbol of political aggression, of political like triumphalism, of majoritarianism. And of course, in Sri Lanka, you've had like a very comprehensive assault on the Tamil minority, and it's kind of like the violence of Sri Lanka is the violence of unreconciled history.
Mhm.
And and in an island society especially, I think those tensions can really start to boil. And so that's kind of what's going on in the background, is this country that's been pacified very violently. and at the same time where these kind of fissures still keep surfacing in its public life.
Okay, last couple of questions, Aatish. The chapter on pilgrimages, Bolivia, Mongolia, Iraq. What is it that's so special about these?
Um, for one, like on a purely visceral level, unbelievable. Three great pilgrimages across three great faiths, a Buddhism that had been all but stamped out by the Soviets. Mongolia was a country like Tibet, where, a huge population were lamas. They were like killed. The monasteries were despoiled and burnt. And you have a very similar kind of suppression of Shia faith in Iraq under Saddam. They were not allowed to do any of these rituals. And so you arrive in Najaf on the night of Ashura or the few nights before Ashura, and the scene is electrifying. These boys in black with like sharpening swords and blades and these incredible like medieval spectacles of faith. And then finally it erupts into scenes that I've never seen in all my life anywhere in the world, of just streets full of men who've done the tatbir, where they've cut their heads and their faces are just pouring blood, children like that. And so on purely on the level of drama, and you have this Andean Christianity in Bolivia. So again, my theme of layers, of syncretism, of these composite faiths, it keeps resurfacing in pilgrimage. But I think what pilgrimage, the role it plays in the book is that it's a kind of it serves as this sort of fiesta or finale, or this absolute I wouldn't, yeah, there's a kind of euphoria mixed in with religious ecstasy that for me, like just purely on the technical level of writing, it felt like I was like, that's a lovely way to end the book. There's an expiation, a feeling of expiation.
But this return, I mean, you write so much about religious fervor and
I know.
how it melds into, your book on Varanasi, for example. At the end, I mean, think about it. This book also, a lot of it is about religion and, coming to terms with yourself, your home, your own personal existence, your own personal sort of freedoms. I mean, can you explain that?
I mean, I don't know. It's so weird, this religious thing. It's like followed me around my whole life. I'm not a religious person. But my first book was a book which used the idea of a pilgrimage as a form of memoir. So it was a journey from Istanbul to Mecca and Mecca to Pakistan, as a way to better understand my father in the context of his country, his religion, and then obviously the man, these three elements. And I obviously started it off, but I've never been left alone by religion. It keeps coming back to haunt me. And, my father was killed by a religious fanatic. And so it's just, I can't explain it, because it's acquired this almost mysterious draw for me. And now I do know a lot about religion, and I know how to write about religion, and I understand the kind of promptings that go into faith. And so it's become so much part of my work, but there's an element of accident to the whole thing. I never really set out to write about religion, but here I am.
Well, fascinating reading at least this book. So I'm going to show it to my viewers again. A Return to Self, Excursions in Exile by Aatish Taseer. Aatish, I do hope you will come back to India very soon, whether or not it's by this time when you come to Nepal. But
Yeah, I'll come and see you in Chandigarh.
absolutely. And since you're 75% Punjabi, you're always welcome here.
Yeah, that's the only thing I've got going for me, is that
We like
75%.
we like them to be different. Thank you
Uh,
so much, Aatish Taseer, for
Thank you.
Tribune. Thank you for your
Thank you.
time.
Lovely to speak to you. Yeah.